Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Today we're going to talk about how to create better customer experiences through more effective search and content discovery. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Jason McClelland, CMO at Algolia, a leading API platform for search and dynamic experiences. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Super excited to be here.
So why don't you start by giving me a little background on Algolia as well as your role there?
Yeah, so Algolia was formed about 9 years ago under the initial premise being there wasn't a good search option for developers building mobile apps. So we were founded, very developer-centric, very mobile-centric. If you fast forward, call it, 3, 4-ish years ago, depending on who you ask, a realization was that most people were using us for website search. So even though we could do a bunch of stuff, we're built into Zendesk and Stripe and Twilio, and we're built into the Sony PlayStation and Nintendo Switch and NBC's The Voice app for the Voice TV show. All these amazing experiences. People mostly use us for website search. The other thing, background on Algolia, my role here, I think this is important for my role, is we're the second biggest search company in the world. So bigger than Microsoft as far as number of searches that we handle, second only to Google, and Google chose us as their partner for Google Cloud and Firebase. So that's a pretty interesting story. The reason why I tell you all that is almost nobody knows that. And so that's my job as CMO, is to find a way to show people that art of the art of the impossible, to get those stories out there, really get developers excited and sort of aware of, like if you're trying to build like an in-app discovery experience, if you're trying to build a gaming discovery experience, if you're trying to build, support case routing, sort of discoverability, we can help you with all those. And we're already doing that with the biggest companies in the world. We just got to get that story out there.
Yeah, that's great. And that's great context there. So let's get started by talking about the importance of search and content discovery to the customer experience. So as an intro to this topic, why don't you give your perspective on just why effective search and intelligent content discovery is so important?
Yeah, first I would start with the premise that there are billions of people in the world. There's billions of pieces of content. And in today's world, people have really short-term attention spans. And so people don't have patience for foraging, right? Is like whether you're CNN or NBC or whether you're Reddit or whether you're Dior, a retailer, people expect you to know them and show them the right thing within half a second. If not, they're in line at Starbucks ordering a coffee. If you're not showing them the right, dress or pair of shoes or piece of content or game, they're going to flip over to, I don't know, some other news source, right? Or some other gaming source or somebody else. Like it's just too easy for people to bounce back and forth between Instagram and Facebook and whatever, TikTok. And so that's like thing number one is it's actually been really hard for companies to drive that kind of experience, which is, okay, I've got millions of people hitting my service. How do I show them the right thing at the right time? So it's kind of thing number one. Thing number two, when I think about search, like a lot of people just think about search as, well, that's that box on a website in the upper right? I go up there, I search for something, it helps put me in touch with content. Right. That's definitely a starting point. A different way to think about search and discovery is every time you're loading a website, every time you're loading an app, you're effectively making API calls, right? Like you're calling something. And whether that's a CDN or a CMS or a different sort of content delivery system, you're calling something. What we're seeing for people is increasingly they're using their search technology, often us, and hopefully more people using us, to actually drive that last mile, which is you're going to have your ERP or CRM or CMS or any sort of like other number of three-letter acronyms that sort of powers the bulk of your business logic. But then what is it that actually exposes that experience and shows it in real time and personalizes in real time? Increasingly, it's services and companies like us.
How should a brand look at consumer expectation? So, you mentioned a few things here, but how can that help them frame even to what you're saying, it's not just a text field on a website. It is often cases, but it's not just that. So how does a brand kind of align consumer expectations with how they do search?
Yeah, thing number one is, yeah, what I just mentioned around, I expect you to know me.
Yeah.
Show me something relevant at first touch, make it engaging, like make the experience engaging. So I want to keep clicking. So I want to keep reading. So I want to keep engaging. That's sort of thing number one. Right now, because we're a week out from Thanksgiving, at least here in the US, uh, retailers are really freaking out because all their inventory is stuck on boats, right? It's like
Mm.
sitting out on a dock outside of LA. And so, retailers, merchandisers are trying to figure out, like, how do I hit and beat my like, how do I beat my revenue numbers for this quarter when I don't know what I can sell? Things are going to sell out. I don't know if people are going back online, if they're going back in store. Are they continuing to buy, comfort wear, or are they going to start dressing up now that offices are reopening? And so the other thing that is top of mind for businesses is, do I have systems that in near real time can help me understand and be super transparent with my users around what's available, like what's actually in stock, when is it going to ship, if it's on back order, like what do I think is the most relevant sort of like second best option, being able to do that in real time because you have no idea what's going to actually be on your shelves. The other thing that's very top of mind is Amazon is becoming too slow for people. And so this idea, the acronyms are all terrible. You'll hear BOPIS, BOPIS, or you'll hear phygital, like a cross between physical and digital. But we got to come up with a better branding for that. And maybe my marketing team can help. But the
Right.
idea is, I can't even wait for Amazon. Like, I want to know, what does Walgreens have in store right now that I can order right now, and within 15 minutes I can be there and pick it up. Just given like the inventory shortages.
And so, behind the scenes, so we're talking about what the consumer has been seeing, but behind the scenes, doing search and recommendations well means syncing up a lot of things. Developers, marketers, supply chain, all those kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about this and just how organizations should think about this in order to do it effectively?
Number one is setting the expectation with your vendors that this near real time is what you're looking for. Like historically, I don't know that people have known what to ask for or to know that they should have to set this expectation. And number two is it's getting easier and harder. The part that's getting easier is, in the past, you either had to build everything yourself. So you're going over to Amazon and you're starting from scratch and saying, okay, I'm going to build something end to end from scratch myself. That's incredibly hard in a multi-year process. Or it was hard because you're buying, some monolithic off-the-shelf SaaS provider, and you're having to rip it apart to figure out, okay, like how exactly do I integrate it with my ERP? How exactly do I integrate it with my PIM? How exactly do I integrate it with like my last mile sort of customer experience? The display layer. And so that was really hard because then essentially you're fighting the system, because it's like the SaaS providers always pride themselves, right? Where it's just like, oh, you get the benefit of multi-tenant SaaS. It's like living in the same apartment as everyone else. Like you don't have to pay for your own plumbing.
Right.
And that's true. The downside then is your apartment looks like everybody else's apartment because you're buying the same thing. And if you're Dior and you're trying to look different than, say, like L'Oreal or some other, premium brand, that's really hard when you're sort of fighting the system and going, okay, we bought the same thing. How do we look different? So
Yeah.
it's gotten easier because there's been this rise of, Gardner calls it composable software. It's companies like us or Twilio or Stripe, which is, hey, it's bigger than an API. It's smaller than hosted SaaS. It's kind of like pre-built Lego blocks that make it easier for developers to build these experience. So that part's gotten a lot easier from a build standpoint. The part that's gotten a lot more complex is, in the past, you would just ring up Salesforce or you'd ring up Adobe and you say, hey, I need a marketing system. And they'd say, hey, we got 7 clouds. We're more than happy to sell you our 7 clouds. Now what you do is you call up, Salesforce or an Adobe and you say, hey, I need your content management system, but I'm going to go to these other composable companies and actually build the sort of experience layer around it. That's really confusing, especially for marketing and business execs who don't come from a technology background. And so that's part of the challenge of my job, right? Is sort of explaining. I mean, literally, like we were doing a deal cycle with a big PC manufacturer, one of the biggest PC manufacturers, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. And we gave the whole pitch that their tech team loved around, APIs and composable and partner integrations and blah, blah, blah. I happen to know the business owner from a past job. So she calls me and she's like, hey, I run a merchandising team and my team hates IT. All that stuff sounded like IT spec, or like IT speak. One, do I care? And two, are you telling me I got to go to IT to be able to run my business going forward? Like, what does this mean? And it's not just you guys, like
Yeah.
Salesforce and Adobe, everybody else using the same language. I'm so freaking confused. And so that's the part that's gotten harder, right? Is because as your go to markets become more technical, you have business people who come up through brand or demand gen or product marketing or product management. And now all of a sudden they're having to figure out sort of APIs and composable and, how do I speak to my developer? So there's a lot of work to do there. And there's a lot of gray area in the market because of that.
So how do you talk with customers about like the quantifiable stuff, quantifiable metrics of success and measures of success there? I mean, obviously you want a great search experience. You want customers to find what they need and buy, and you want near real time or real time results. But how do you quantify that for customers, and how should they be thinking about that?
Yeah, fortunately, that's really easy. I mean, this is like the days of digital, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, what's your bounce rate? Like, are people coming to your app? Are they coming to your site? Are they leaving within a second, or are they actually staying? How much time are they spending engaging? Like, are they going through multiple pages? Are they scrolling up and down? Are they adding things to cart? So, all of these things are things that are really easy to measure and really easy to A/B test. And I mean, we've been doing this for, I don't know, 10 plus years in marketing. And so it's kind of like back to basics, which is really building a robust system that you say, okay, what's my hypothesis? Like, I think people need to see A versus B. I'm going to run this test. And what ultimately drives, like bigger engagement, bigger AOV, like average order value, higher cart conversion or higher game conversion or higher, whatever your sort of KPI is. Fortunately, that's kind of the easy part.
There's this growing trend and expectation from consumers for personalization, and I want it now. Exactly what you were saying about Amazon is too slow for some people right now. There's also this expectation for personalization. I mean, are we how do we solve for all of the, we've got supply chain shortages, we've got rising expectations from consumers. Do we go, is there any going back from this? And if not, what does an organization do to mitigate some of this in the short term? Let's assume, supply chain gets solved at some point in the short to medium term.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely no going back. It's only going to accelerate. And I know that that's scary. Like I was reading an interesting article, I think it was on CNBC this last week around Macy's, and sort of market concerns around like, is Macy's making aggressive enough investments in their digital business and their cross-channel business and the idea of like buying online and picking up in store to be able to stay relevant. And I forget the name of it, but they now have an activist investor who is trying to get the company to basically separate and
Mm.
say, hey, split off your digital business and go roll that into its own thing. I think it was Saks Fifth Avenue that ended up doing the same thing where they have the in-person stores. And now they have it, they call it like Saks off Fifth or something like
Yeah.
that. And so when you look at that, like there are plenty of examples of companies that were maybe a little bit behind on the move to digital, and now they're really trying to scramble, right? It's how do I keep up, right? Given that these are multi-million dollar, multi-year investments, and my competitors are 2, 3, 5 years ahead of me, it's only going to accelerate. And it was interesting. I was talking with a guy over in London, one of the analysts from, I forget if it was Forrester or Gardner, talking with him maybe 2 months ago around there are differences in expectations geographically. Meaning, like in America, I expect to be able to go to anybody's website, see what they have online, see what they have in store, see what the availability is, know what the shipping time is, expect you within, like, I don't know, 99% that it's going to come to me when you have it, when you say. And I also expect that if I go to the store, it's going to be the same price as what you told me was on the website. And so it's incredibly dismaying to me. Like, as an aside, I try my hardest to never go into Walmart. I went to Walmart for something maybe a month ago because they had it online. And when I went to the store, it was like 20% more. And
Mm.
my initial reaction is, oh my God, like what year is this? That
Right.
felt like, I don't know, 2011. But anyway, talking to the guy in London, and he's like, no, in Europe, like we just expect that it's going to be more expensive when you go into the store because they got to pay for brick and mortar and blah blah blah. I'm like, that's very thoughtful of you, right? As an
Right.
American
Right.
shopper, I don't care, right? It's like, well, that's your business problem, not my shopper problem. Like, I want to know what you have, when I can get it, how much it's going to cost, and it feels like shenanigans if I go into the store and it's a totally different price. So yeah, anyway, sorry for the
Yeah.
ramble, but yeah, there's no going back. Like increasingly, like that's the expectation. And so then the idea is like you got to make the right investments, and that's incredibly hard. But the idea is like if you don't, you're going to fall behind. You're going to become irrelevant. And so, really being clear, like what are the business goals that we're trying to move? Who are our customers, and how do they shop? And then how do I sort of skate ahead of the puck, right? Like how can I leapfrog? Like the days of I'm just going to buy a one size fits all marketing cloud, that was 10 years ago.
Right.
And now it's okay, how am I going to drive across channel, across app, across web, across in person retail? Like, which providers can give me that experience, and have they actually done it? So, show me where you've done it at a company that's like me. Show me how much time it took. Show me what the business results were. Show me the change management and the type of people you needed. But, like, really sort of putting that to a test,
Yeah.
or else it's just going to be really, really hard. And quite often people go and, spend millions of dollars with Deloitte or Publicis or people like that to help them with that journey. And
Right.
that works too.
Right. Right. So let's talk a little bit now about some predictions for and some recommendations for organizations looking ahead to next year. Why don't we start with personalized experiences? So this is certainly, as I mentioned before, top of mind for customers. They appreciate it, but more more important, they expect it. So where do we go from, where things currently are? What can we expect? Technologies, AI, ML, all that kind of stuff to help us get there.
There's a couple things, and I think it really depends on what type of business you're on, and what type of business you're in, what you're trying to drive, who your customers are. So there's a bunch of nuance in there.
Yeah.
In general, a theme that we're seeing, there's sort of two themes, around ML and AI that you just mentioned. One, we're in a pretty big trough of disillusionment with AI. Like at this point, I grimace every time I see the word or say the word AI, because for the last, I don't know, call it 8 years, 6 years, most of it's been garbage.
Yeah.
And so I know probably 80% of the time that when somebody says AI, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right. Right.
And that's just like, I mean, most of it's like machine learning models, and most of it is like, it's not, it's just not right. Anyway, so you have like this trough of disillusionment or skepticism, with business buyers and even developers. They look at it and they go, "Okay, you're telling me you got some great AI-driven thing. Is it really real? Because I've had 20 other companies tell me before, and the stuff just actually didn't work. It didn't help me. It didn't work." So that's kind of one body of thing that like we as an industry have to dig ourselves out of, is like rebuilding that credibility of what exactly is it and how exactly does it work. And that leads to the second secular trend, this idea around transparent or explainable AI, or transparent or explainable ML,
Yeah.
which is I really want the robots to help me do my job, but the robots have to be able to explain what they're doing in a way that a human understands it, because then it makes a human smarter. And the human can go explain to their boss of like, hey, well, here's why I recommended article A versus B, or game A versus B, or red dress versus blue dress, because the ML showed me that it maximizes revenue, or maximizes margin, or it maximizes most popular, or whatever the thing may be, right?
Yeah.
So we've seen a lot more retailers explicitly asking for that, which is, hey, we love that your models are transparent. It makes my team smarter. Like, how do you guys get even better at that? So
Yeah.
that's a big trend. Is one, is it real? And then two, show me it's real. Show me why you're recommending this, because I've got to go be able to explain to my management.
The transparency. I mean, there's also things like bias and things that we can, sort of protect against, as well as just, I was talking with a company the other day, and they were using a very well-known company's business intelligence tools, and simply said it doesn't work. And so you could say, okay, well, that's just a fail for AI, ML, all of the above. Or you could say, man, if they had some insights, like exactly what you're saying, if they had some insights as to why it's failing, they could actually help. And that's where I think the humans and the robots are meant to work together. Right. So,
Yeah,
and I
at least in
think
the
that.
short term.
Right, right,
Sorry.
yeah. Well, but I'll be long gone by the time they actually take over, at least from my perspective. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? About, again, humans making AI better and vice versa.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting. So, in my last job, selling a data science platform to enterprises, this was a huge movement, and it was primarily led by pharmaceutical, life science, and banking and insurance companies.
Yeah.
And the reason why is these companies have been data driven for 30, 40, 50 years, right? I mean, that's like their bread and butter. They've always been model driven.
Yeah.
But historically, they were able to automate pricing and basically just say the model made me do it.
Yeah.
There's a number of societal changes, right? Which is and in the past, like if you get sued, where it's just like, hey, why are you pricing differently based on race or gender or age or county or city or house type or whatever? In the past, they were able to say, well, the model made me do it. Data
Yeah.
in, data out. Like that's what happened. Increasingly, courts are saying that's not okay anymore. Like you've got to
Right.
show me why the model and how the model, and making sure that you're not sort of like feeding biased data in that's like resulting in biased data out. And that's got, primarily the heavily regulated industries like in a huge scramble,
Yeah.
which is good for everybody who's not in heavily regulated industries because you're not on the hot seat yet. But
Right.
it's forcing that change in technology around that sort of transparent and explainable AI of like, you got to understand like why the model's recommending what it does. You got to, have tests around like model drift and model bias. So
Yeah.
systems are coming out that help you with that, as opposed to saying, I don't know, data in, data out, like the machine made me do it.
Right.
It's a
Right.
huge movement that I think the rest of us will get the benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. How about localization, hyper localization? What do you see coming, down the horizon for that?
When we think about hyperlocalization, what we're talking about in my part of the industry is what we talked about earlier, that sort of idea of buy online, pick up in store.
Yeah.
Or also, hey, what do people who look like me, I should be careful with that term, what do people who look like me tend to want based on where I'm at?
Right.
Like if you think about like Google's really good at this, right? Like if I go to Google and I type in like lunch by me, like Google's able to figure out, well, where are you and what are the restaurants that are open right by you, and like it really
Yeah.
optimizes the results based on like what's a half mile away from you. Uh, that's now
Yeah.
being democratized, and that's one of the things that we just did a monster deal with the biggest pharmacy company. And that was exactly what they were looking for, is the idea of like, hey, somebody needs something, whether it's like toilet paper or soap or gum. uh, I need to be able to show them in that half a second like what's in stock and what's most relevant for them in their neighborhood, because there's three different stores within a half mile from them, so which one should they go to?
Yeah.
In the past, that was incredibly hard, being able to stitch together that sort of geolocation data based on your IP address, and your systems like MAC address or whatever, your MAC ID, stitch that together across like your PIM system, your CRM system, your ERP system, like stitch all that together,
Right.
and then
Right.
like ultimately in real time show that. Now that's quickly becoming the expectation. And honestly, like that was accelerated, I don't know, 5 years just because of COVID. People were
Yeah.
like, I can't go in a store and wait for a half hour to pick up toilet paper. Like, I got to know who's got what, and I want to be in and out.
Right.
And so
Right.
that was a boon to my part of the industry, at least.
Well, hey, one last question before we wrap up. I got some general predictions and things from you. What can we expect from Algolia in the coming months or year that relates to some of the things we talked about?
Yeah. So one, you're going to hear a lot more about us, and telling those stories that I mentioned at the beginning around oh my gosh, we're built into the biggest gaming systems, the biggest, media companies, the biggest SaaS companies. And so just showing people that sort of world of possibility of, hey, like things that used to be really hard are now much easier. So you're just going to hear a lot more of that. We're going to do a big splash at NRF for the retail industry. Really, really excited about that.
Nice.
You're going to see a continued expansion. If I go back to the beginning operating premise of billions of pieces of content, billions of people, we make it easier for developers to put those things together. So you're just going to see a lot more product launches and API launches that support that, right? Which is like how all the different ways, how do we get better at doing that for media? How do we get better at doing that for gaming? How do we get better at, sort of predicting intent and recommending certain things? And how do we get better at really analyzing your data, whether it's like, data or plain text or imagery? And so there's a bunch of stuff around that you're going to see over the next, coming months. So super excited for that.
Great. Looking forward to hearing about it. Well, Jason, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Jason McClelland on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not so active on Twitter, but super happy to engage with people. Obviously, would love for you to listen in to Algolia. Come try it out. Super happy to engage. But yeah, Algolia is also on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, all the channels. We're there.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Jason McClelland, CMO at Algolia, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to the Agile World with Greg Kihlstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.